Hello, my friends. Hello, my life warriors, wherever you are in the world. I do hope you're having a good day. Welcome to the Day In, Day Out podcast. Woo! Today on episode 140, I was very lucky and privileged to have Turner on the podcast. Turner Coates. He is a podcaster, and we were talking about his podcast, Gimme Da Loot. Basically, it is a D&D podcast. We talked about a number of things, how he got his podcast started, what was the sort of basic concept of it all, basically the storytelling, what go behind the D&D adventures he constructs for his merry band, the Party of Five. And yeah, we even talked about some of the sort of Marvel TV shows which are out there now, like WandaVision and The Winter Soldier. All in all, he's a very good chap. I really enjoyed my conversation with him. And yeah, I look forward to working with him in the future. But please enjoy the podcast episode. And yeah, have a great day. And don't forget to subscribe. Have a good one. Peace. Hello, my friends. Hello, my life warriors, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the Day In, Day Out podcast. Woo! Today on episode, can't believe it, 140, I have the immense pleasure to have Turner Coates on. He is, how can I say, he is a podcast host himself. His podcast is called Gimme Da Loot, D&D Extraordinaire. Or am I being overly generous there? And who knows? But Turner, how are you today, sir?
Great, Miwa. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
I'm happy to have you here. Like, you know what? I've got to say, one of my first podcasts I did with people like over Zoom or like was with someone who did D&D. So it's kind of like, yeah, this is kind of like a throwback for me. But yeah.
Yeah, there is a very sizable actual play podcast community, and that's something that surprised me when I got into it. How far-reaching it was, and the different varieties and flavors. Now we do bring some things that are a little bit different on our podcast regarding the diversity and varied experiences of our cast, which I think is fantastic. But yeah, it's a whole genre unto itself.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. How can I put it? It did surprise me, the sort of diversity of your crew, because like, yeah, it's just like, it's not a bag of misfit toys, but I would say it's not the usual people you'd say would be on one D&D and doing a D&D podcast.
Well, yeah, and I don't think I'm saying anything negative about the genre as a whole, but when you think of a Dungeons and Dragons podcast, or you look at a Dungeons and Dragons podcast, and if you went into it assuming you were going to see and hear five cisgender white dudes, you wouldn't generally be too far off the mark. And there is some variety out there. There are some other podcasts that are a little bit more diverse, but I kind of looked into it. This group of guys that I played Destiny with, video games, that I met, Harland, who plays Todd the Tiefling, I met through my work, and we built up a friendship, and we started playing Destiny together, which is a online first-person shooter game, and he introduced me to this other core group of people, and they had an incredible bantery dynamic. The banter between the two of them, you get a group of male friends that have been friends together for a very long time. They're very good at taking the piss out of each other and being able to laugh it off and go on to the next minute or section of whatever they're doing. So they had that excellent dynamic, and I had started streaming Dungeons and Dragons with another podcast with another group that was kind of falling apart a little bit, just because of COVID and some of the other things that kind of life was getting in the way a little bit. So I was like, okay, I've got the bug now. I want to do this. And I've got a story I really want to tell. And I just so happen to know the group of guys that would be the perfect cast members for that story. So I floated that out there to them. They all jumped on it. And it's been, I think, a really fun and fantastic experience to kind of get rolling with that. There's a lot of trials and tribulations with starting a new actual play podcast. Number one is,
Mm,
I'm Jamie has some podcast experience. He does a gaming podcast with some of his coworkers. He's in the game industry. Harland has done a couple of podcasts before, but half of our cast has never been on a podcast regularly.
mm,
We were starting from, duct tape and baling wire equipment situation, basically. And you can hear that as you kind of go through, as we upgrade our recording environments, we upgrade our equipment, and they get a little bit more familiar with the dynamic of playing Dungeons and Dragons for a podcast, because it is different from how
mm.
you might play at home. The beautiful thing about Dungeons and Dragons, because I spent some time thinking about what do I really love about this game, is it is a radically, at its heart, if we take it for what its potential to be, it's a radically inclusive activity. It can be played a number of different ways. It can be played, as a strategy game, as a storytelling game. It can be played as a computer game or as a board game. It can be played over Zoom. It can be played in person. But that's all just stage setting for the fact that it can support every kind of character you can imagine: white, black, trans, Asian. Yeah, just every type of identity can exist within this heroic setting that people will have the opportunity to come in and participate in, and tell a story. And it's been great to kind of set the stage for that and let these guys come in and kind of play in that playground a little bit.
Excellent, excellent. So when I was doing my research, you're on episode 14 at this present time.
Right. Yeah. We were transitioning from a bi-weekly schedule to a weekly schedule. So we have our main storyline. We record every other week about a 3-hour session, which then gets edited down to yeah. And that cuts down to anywhere from an hour and 45 minutes to 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then we were doing that as a single episode, but I'm trying to break it up into smaller chunks now and get it out on a weekly basis.
Mm.
On the off weeks, we also record our bonus content for our Patreon supporters. We're doing a podcast called The Hunter's Party, which is we've discovered very early on in the conversation that a couple of our cast members hadn't watched the show Supernatural. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all.
What you mean, Sam and Dean Winchester?
Exactly, Sam and Dean Winchester. Exactly. Just checking. You never know.
Hey,
you never know.
No. I would
So,
like put it this way. I went ride and die on that show in season 3. Just basically, yeah.
Seasons 1 through 5 are a perfect story, and then seasons 6 through 15 are very entertaining. I will say that. Don't get me wrong, I love the show. I'm doing a podcast about it. But so we found out a couple of cast members had never watched. We're just like, okay, cool. It had just ended. We were talking about the finale. So we're going to do a recap show. We're going to go back to the very beginning. We'll listen to an episode, and then we'll do something D&D related for it. So if there was a monster on it, we'll do what's called a homebrew conversion of that monster to be used in a D&D campaign. And that's one of our Patreon supporter products. And then we're also doing a player versus player tournament where we're recording some videos where the guy that's a little bit, because when we play D&D for the podcast, it's what you call theater of the mind. We don't use as many maps and figures and stuff like that because it's an auditory format. And much like a British audio drama, you want to convey that imagery through your tones. And when you use a lot of the tools that are available for regular, quote unquote, regular D&D, you get into situations where you're like, okay, well, I'm going to move that guy over there. Well, that works great when you're playing a game, but it's not super compelling listening when painting a word picture. So, but when we do the player versus player tournament, we are doing a little bit more of that figure battle map type of play. And so we're recording those as videos and posting those to our Patreon. And eventually we'll stream a little of that content as we get our streaming channel set up.
Oh no, that's fantastic, because like this is the thing. I think I think you summed it up pretty much perfectly by saying it's pretty much like a radio drama, or basically a week by week episode.
Very much so. Yeah.
Very much of Supernatural. So it's like
but the interesting piece of it is, and the best description I've ever heard of doing it is, imagine you're trying to write a novel, but each one of the characters in the novel had the agency to write their own story beats while you were writing the book.
Yeah.
And that's very, very much what like hosting the podcast is. I have a story I want to tell. There is a start and finish to the story that we're telling. And there are individual character arcs and beats that I want to get to along each one of the characters' journey. But how the guys get there, when they get there, whether or not they get there at all ultimately is influenced by their decisions, their play, their dice rolls. And that's that kind of X factor element that comes into it that you can never quite predict is,
Mm.
you can set a situation up, but you never know. In fact, I think it's episode 4 of the podcast is I went into it. We were setting up kind of the big confrontation of the first arc. And I had mentioned to the guys, hey, so there's a mechanic in Dungeons and Dragons where I called a short rest or a long rest.
Yeah.
A short rest is where you chill out for an hour and you get some of your abilities and hit points back. A long rest is where you sleep for 8 hours and you're fully refreshed. So I wanted to encourage the guys to take that short rest to kind of heal up a little bit for this big fight that was coming without explicitly telling them that. So I hinted at that, hey, this is how much time you have before you think the attack is going to come. The enemies have told you they're going to attack at sundown.
Mm.
I did not expect the guys to do the math and figure out exactly how much time it would take for them to search each building in the area they were in at that point to try and to come up with a plan B. And so on the fly, I had to improv like the search and like the search of 5 or 6 different buildings. And so it was like, okay. And that's my favorite episode from that first arc. It's where the guys kind of flex in their space jet. There's a really great kind of one-off episode that we've done that I haven't got to publish yet because it's got some real spoilers for the main plot that put
Uh-huh.
the guys in a completely different setting and lets them really kind of flex their acting chops a little bit. And I'll tell you who really kicks ass in that is Anthony, who plays Baba Tunde who's the kind of the more stoic Tabaxi, which is a cat person barbarian, who's kind of the sensible person in the group. The rest of them are really just a rough and tumble group of miscreants. But Baba kind of has some class to him. So he's very reserved during the cast. But in this alternate situation, Anthony was able to kind of flex a little bit, and it's just
Yeah.
fantastic. I probably 3 or 4 episodes before I can publish that because of, again, it spoils some of the grander picture. But yeah, it's an interesting way to tell a story. It's a fun way to do it. It can be a little bit harrowing at times from an editing perspective, as you kind of figure it out. But I think we're telling a cool story. I think it is very much, it's not your traditional Conan the Barbarian or Excalibur Sword in the Stone story. It is largely satirical in a lot of ways. I mean, the elevator pitch is 5 dysfunctional randos meet up at a fantasy truck stop and try and save some lumberjacks. That's the elevator pitch for it. And then it kind of goes from there, and there's a larger some overarching, and we're going to hit some different themes and some different genres. I've got kind of a giant James Bondish episode planned at one point. There's going to be at least one giant robot fight in there. There'll be dragons, of course. We got to have dragons. There's going to be at least one Wild West episode or two, and a couple other things that will pop up. So it's, and again, that's the beauty of what I mean about that kind of the radical inclusive potential of Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't have to be huzzah, I have a sword,
Hasoof.
hark over yonder, there beest a goblin. It's not
Andrew
that.
Knave.
Exactly. But here's the thing, if that's what you want, that's what it can be.
That.
That's what it can be, and look, Dungeons and Dragons has gotten hugely popular over the last 2 years for a number of factors. Stranger Things absolutely helped.
Yes.
The fact that there has been a transition from quote unquote nerd culture or things that were typically perceived as childish or not cool has moved into the mainstream of popular culture, a large part because of the MCU, whether you love those movies or not. And I love those movies. I'm gonna be honest with you.
You're going to get no complaints from me. No complaints at all.
They've mainstreamed a lot of this stuff. So people have become more willing to adopt it. Wizards of the Coast has done a fantastic job embracing the streaming and podcast community and supporting them. They realize how big of a marketing bonanza it is for their product. But D&D has seen about a 30% year over year or Wizard of the Coast 30% year over year revenue growth for the last 2 years. They've gotten so big. In fact, Hasbro, which owns Wizards of the Coast, has taken them from being a division to making them their own pillar of the company. They've reorganized their company around Wizards of the Coast with Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. So it's not going away anytime soon. There have been a ton of additional tools to develop for people to be able to play it during the pandemic. And what's interesting, because this isn't the first time we did. There's a fascinating article on CNN probably about a week ago about how the game of bridge became popular because of the Great Depression, because people didn't have any money to go out and do things. So they started playing card games, bird watching, stamp collecting, all of those very traditional old school hobbies directly came out of the economic situation of the Great Depression. Well, the pandemic is going to have that impact too. Dungeons and Dragons growth is a big part of that. You've seen some additional kind of smaller online games like Among Us and Fall Guys and things like that really kind of explode during streaming has gotten even bigger. So, and some of that stuff just doesn't go away. I mean, if all of a sudden I get my second vaccination and I'm able to go out and do whatever it is I want to do, it just means I get to play D&D in person instead of over projector, basically.
It's like, okay, everybody, we're going awesome.
Yeah, exactly. So we're playing digitally right now, and that's the other thing too that has helped. Virtual tabletops are the different programs and websites that allow you to play Dungeons and Dragons with anybody across the globe, anytime, anywhere, just as easily as you are sitting, and in some cases easier than if you were sitting at a table with them in the same building. And as those like Roll20 is one of them. Foundry, Roll20 is the one that we use most frequently because again we don't do a ton of the battle maps, so that's just kind of a bare bones basic ones. But there's some really cool fancy ones out there, and the technology continues to develop in the space. I just backed a program called Dungeon Alchemist. It's a Swedish program that uses AI to draw dungeon maps for you, or encounter maps for you. So I can draw a little box and it'll bloop, pop in all the little 3D things that would go in a wizard's laboratory in there. Because I am no good at drawing maps. I am no good. I know where my strengths and weaknesses are. Maps, not one of our strengths. So having something like that I can just draw a couple of boxes and then have it ploop up what I need is really cool, and it makes it easier, and it makes it, again, it kind of levels that playing field, which again is the other really, look, I'm not Hemingway, heck, I'm not even Stephen King, but I can tell a good story through D&D. The cast members are talented and they're funny, but I mean they're not professional actors, but they are able to come in and they're able to portray these characters in a meaningful way, in an entertaining way through D&D. There's not that skill barrier. Like I can go out and toss a ball around, but I don't have a ton of fun doing that because I'm just not that great at it. Here you can be okay at it and still have an incredible amount of fun. So it's really, again, something that there's no barrier for entry for anybody who wants to participate.
Yeah, but like that's the thing. That's the thing about Dungeons and Dragons, anything like any game like that. And like if you look at World of Warcraft, like the sort of digital version, it is like about the sort of greater story which comes from it. Like, yes, the Horde, the Alliance, like I haven't played World of Warcraft, but yeah, I know elements of the story. Yeah. And like basically, like, look, you're learning on the fly when you like all of a sudden everyone's like going, okay, yeah, how much time we've got? Okay, great. Let's do a quick search. And you're like going, and I can imagine right now, yeah, you've got your story chops, but what are you going to be like in 100 episodes time, or what are you like in a day? So you'd be able to adapt for that. Wow.
Oh yeah, it's cool to have that flexibility. I played WoW for probably about 2 or 3 years. Actually met one of the guys from the first podcast I was in through WoW. Got to be real life friends with him. And yeah, it's that's the thing with WoW is there's that grind. You've got to go in and you've got to play it. 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 And you're kind of existing within that realm. And yes, I can create my little dwarf warrior, but he's only ever going to be this one type of dwarf warrior that Blizzard has decided to script for. Yeah. So there's the concept of what's called a session zero. And that's before you sit down and start your game, you sit down with the people that you're going to play and you have a conversation about, okay, guys, what type of game do we want to play? Do you want to play something that's really, really serious? Do you guys want to play a bunch of rogues in the city in an urban campaign and it's your job to rob from the rich and make yourself richer? You know what I mean? Not Robin Hood, but just rob and rob. Do you want to play a more heroic? Do you want to do steampunk? Do you want to do something more a little bit sci-fi? Are you okay with silly? Do you want to play it on? Do you want it to play on the easier side of things? Just like when you go into a video game.
Yeah.
They're very good about having a story mode option, a normal mode option, and a hard mode option. If you take the time to sit down and do that before you start a D&D campaign, then you're going to find that everybody is more likely to enjoy the experience, because you'll see it whenever you go to, and this can be kind of a turnoff for some people thinking about trying to get into the hobby. You can go to I mean, there's a ton of different groups and forums out there where you hear people talking about it. And, I'm not a big social media guy. I started participating in Twitter aggressively to promote the podcast, because that's part of wanting to have a successful podcast, and have been really, really warmed by how positive the tabletop role playing community at large is in that space and in general.
Mm.
You've got toxic fandom everywhere. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish we could have nice things, but you're going to have people that are jerks about the stupidest things no matter where you go. But the thing that you'll see when you kind of go into those online social spaces, and people talking about, oh, I've got this one guy at the table that he's always working against the rest of the group. Like, they want to go left and he's always fighting to go right, or they want to go good guys and they want to go bad guys. I'm like, well, you're playing two different games, and you're never going to be able to fix that friction. He sat down to play checkers, you sat down to play chess, and you're getting mad when he's trying to jump your knight with a red piece. There's no middle ground there. So that's why that communication at the very beginning is, okay, guys, we're all going to get together, we're all going to play chess. Is that cool? And if somebody doesn't like that, then go, okay, guys, I understand you want to play checkers this time. We're playing chess this time. Next time we'll play checkers. Or, they maybe find a different group to play with that fits their play style a little bit better. Because again, the only wrong way to play D&D is one where at the end of the session, somebody feels like they were excluded or didn't have fun, or because there's going to be, like, there are sessions where your guys just get beat down, and it's just like, man, I can't believe I rolled so bad tonight. You know what I mean? It's just because again, those dice always come into it no matter what. But at the end of the day, if you're making an effort to keep that communication there, it's a collaborative storytelling experience that it's just a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, I hear that. Now, this is the thing. Now, one of the things, like, I've been now podcasting myself for a little bit of time. Like, this September will be 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, this is the thing, like, stuff I try to keep myself in my sort of memory of where I was when I first started, and some of the challenges which came out of the things I first started with. What sort of challenges have you found just getting things started? You mentioned you had a podcast before and it went its own separate ways.
Yeah. So the previous podcast I was in was the Friends and Flares podcast. They had actually done a season of their story before they invited me to join. So I actually joined in season 2 of their podcast, and they're a great group of guys. But we all know 2020 was a heck of a year, and as I'm sure being somebody who does podcasting, the editing a podcast can be a little bit of a Sisyphean experience where you roll that boulder on the top of the hill and it's time to edit that next one and get it right back out. So the guy who did our editing was struggling with the time management with the things that he was going on with his work. Our DM for that was, again, kind of going through a similar situation where things just got a little bit unstable for him, and they just weren't able to make the personal commitment to show up every week and do it. And then they'd also kind of branched out into streaming, which was a really cool experience, but added another layer of complication when the situation. So they went on hiatus, and it just has never kind of sparked back up. So yeah, but there's a lot of. So the number one thing I think for a D&D podcast, because it's different if it was just me in my closet recording, because I have 100% control of that situation. I have 100% control of my recording environment, my equipment, the energy and attitude that I bring to every session. Doing any audio drama, but a D&D podcast as well, you're now responsible for a cast of players as well. And you have to be a little bit of accepting that they're not going to necessarily have the same resources that you do when you come into that environment. They're not going to have the same knowledge base. You got to make sure they've got that commitment. You know what I mean? That's why going into it, I was very good, guys. Like, this isn't, hey, we're just going to play D&D and record it. Yeah. That's very different from, we're going to do a D&D podcast. This is something that, yes, I'm doing it for fun and but I do want to be successful at it. That's just, I don't like doing stuff unless I have the opportunity to succeed. So, are you willing to commit to show up every other week for the next year to 2 years to do that? Are you willing to invest over time to upgrade your equipment so we can show an upward improvement curve? Are you willing to, because I'm like a teacher. Sometimes I assign homework like, hey, here's a 30 question questionnaire about your character that I need you to fill out so I can put it onto Patreon, but also so that you stop and think about additional aspects of it. Because you are really, when you're playing D&D, it's cool to have a piece of paper that says he's a fighter, he's an elf, his name's Bob. Let me roll the dice to hit the goblin, because that may be all you
Yeah.
want to do when you're at the table. But when you're doing a podcast, again, you've got to add a little bit more depth to these characters. And don't get me wrong, we are exceedingly silly. We are not I don't want to make it sound like we are high fantasy. There is an uncomfortable amount of immature humor in our podcast. So it's not, again, we are not Tolkien. So
Yeah, no, all I've got to simply say is, the cookie line, which was it's like from one of your podcasts.
Yeah, it is. We've got yeah, but I mean, that's the tone that I like. Those are the podcasts that I enjoy listening to. I enjoy some of the other more serious ones as well, but that's also what I know that I excel at. And again, what the dynamic of my cast was fit for. So that's the biggest challenge. I mean, because what's the worst case scenario is we get a year into this and then one of your core pillars of the podcast has to be written off the show, and you have to be prepared for that. And even with the story that I'm telling, where these guys are mystically bound together, I have written in narrative loopholes that will allow me in a critical situation that, hey, I'm moving to someplace that doesn't have internet. I mean, that can happen. That I would have the ability to recast them as just like producing a TV show almost. I have to be prepared for that. So that's probably the biggest challenge, is just kind of getting everybody up and on the same page. And then once they kind of get into it, you start to build some momentum with it, but then part of that too is, and this is just like the session zero for the game, when you sit down with your cast for your first time and have that conversation. I came into this from my previous podcast was a little bit more of a, hey, we're going to try and run this by committee situation, where I'm going to be this guy and I'm going to be this guy and I'm going to be this guy. And
that's not a good thing.
Well, it was intended to be very supportive, but
Yeah.
it created additional friction if that particular person wasn't able to commit the time that they needed to support that role in a given week. I came into Gimme Da Loot as basically writer, producer, director, and all of the characters that aren't the main characters. And that's is a lot. It's an awful lot. But luckily I'm working from home, so I can sleep less. So my commute is down. But in all seriously though, the cast I have now, the guys are great. They are. It's not like they're not contributing. They've all stepped up and are contributing more and more and more on a voluntary basis to kind of help improve the overall, because they see the worth, and they see, they're getting more connected with their characters. They're getting more connected with their stories and the communities, and they're chipping in, but in their own unique ways that they're bringing to it, and that makes it even better. You know what I mean? I still got to edit the thing, man. It never stops. War never changes, and podcasts always have to be edited. That's just because to steal a line from what is it? Not Wasteland. Oh God. Fallout, the video game Fallout. That's how but yeah, those are the big things. You know what I mean? And then just quite frankly, getting comfortable with putting yourself out there. I mean, I'm definitely a talker. I have grown into being a more social person. My day job, I'm director of purchasing for a national commercial design firm. I've been in leadership positions for the last 2 or 3 companies that I've worked for. So having to go from being somebody who deals with quite a bit of social anxiety in general, OCD, it's helped with that. Actually, it's helped me be more comfortable getting on a Zoom call with a completely random person and talking about everything that I could ever possibly talk about. Yeah, exactly. So, but I mean, so that's something too. And, learning to navigate the challenges that are facing the community right now as well. I mean, because we, obviously we're going through a lot in America right now, not just COVID, but a pretty big social change overall. It's not hard to look at the news and see that everything is going on. That influences the types of stories we tell and how we interpret the types of stories that are being told. So making sure that we are navigating through that space in an appropriate fashion and not, not steering into territory that really doesn't serve our audience the way that we would want to serve it, or tell the stories that we would tell. You have to be conscious of that, and you have to have some empathy for it. And it's a lot right now, man. We've had 45 mass shootings in the last month here,
Oh,
which is classified as a shooting where four or more people are injured or killed, not counting the shooter. In the last 30 days, 45 across the U.S. So
okay, yeah. No, wow.
yeah, sorry, took that to a real dark place real quick,
hey, no,
but
no, but like this is the whole thing. That is one of the realities,
yeah,
which kind of took a back burner because of like the lockdowns which came into place, and but
mhm.
a number of people, well, and like I imagine that number plummeted. I don't have the actual facts or anything there, but
No, there's definitely been an acceleration, and I think it's a combination of you've got everybody. I mean, the mental health issues in this country haven't gotten any better. The social issues in this country haven't gotten any better, and we've all been locked in our houses for a year stewing, and so that it's the pot is starting to boil over a little bit now. Luckily, where there's been a little bit of a sea change on the political side of things here, and hopefully we'll continue to see things improve, but we got a lot of work to do.
mm,
And what that presents a challenge for a bunch of guys sitting around and pretending to be orcs and goblins is you have to be conscious then of the stories that you put out in that space, and respectful of it. I mean, I am unabashedly on the left side of things when it comes to the political spectrum, and haven't been afraid to put that out there in our podcast. I mean, the cops are the bad guys in a certain respect for a portion of our the paladins of the Church of Justice play an antagonistic role in our podcast, and
mm,
that's not coincidental. And it's played in a silly satirical way. I mean, their names are Sir Cull, Sir Tan, and Sir Conference, for example. I mean, so there's that goofy element to it that we're not going to put away, but there are some real kind of underlying heavier things that we are telling in a very, very goofy way that I hope people pick up on and appreciate as we kind of go into it.
mm. I would imagine, like, I hear that, and like this is the thing with telling stories where yes, you make some of the law enforcement, like, you know what I mean, a little bit ridiculous, but still have that sort of this is how they affect the
Right.
characters along the way. Is it a case of like, do you like sometimes paint some other law enforcement as, yeah, they are the good as well?
No, there's absolutely good guys. Yeah, there's absolutely good guys. So I mean, if to go if you're real crunchy with the lore on
Yeah.
it. So the and I'm trying to think what's been hinted through the podcast. So the core conflict in the background of our story has to do with the role that divinity takes in this particular universe, and specifically the divine beings and how they interact with the populace.
Yeah.
So as a part of that, one of the primary deities in that is the god of justice, and he's really the and I don't think I'm giving too much away with it. He's one of the bad actors in this particular scenario, and that influences. So it's not about really law enforcement being bad themselves, because look,
Mm,
I have a tremendous amount of respect for anybody who is willing to go and put their life on the line on a daily basis in the service of the community, whether they're a police officer, whether they are a firefighter or a first responder or a nurse or a teacher. That is work that is real and is needed and is important. But there are some systemic issues that have to be changed, and that's kind of what we're talking about on our side. I think, again, goofiest way possible that we can do
mm,
it, but that's kind of, I mean, if you take a step back and really kind of overall examine the first arc of the story, and get again, you got to really take a macro view to get this. It's got an element. It's talking about displacing indigenous people and taking advantage of people. The core. I do have a hyper capitalistic organization, the Mercantiles Guild, that is not a good guy, and that one's a little bit more blunt. And the first arc is very much the conflict that arises from that is, hey, they came in, they took advantage of these people, this caused this, they reacted in a way that wasn't constructive, and we kind of go from there. The second arc of the story that we're in right now, the what I'm calling Hex and the Sagacity arc, is really more of a setup arc as the guys kind of figure out what's going on to him. And we're actually recording, right, because we our releases are about 60 days behind where we're at on the release side of things, just because of the extra time that it takes. You want to get some episodes banked. If a guy has to miss a session or two, I want to have the puff in there to where I can be able to fill it through. But the later arcs are a little bit more about individual discovery and the individual guys, but some of the conflict that will come into that will come from these larger kind of, I think, narrative themes that we all can identify with. And it's one of those things that we, if you listen to, we do bonus episodes called DM splainings, and they're kind of a mixed bag where I sit down with one of the cast members and talk about, hey, this is the world we've built, and here's some additional details on it, or here's their backstories, where they started playing D&D, or what movies they like, or how do you play your character well if you're this particular class. And we did one for Black History Month, because Anthony, Jazz, and Harland are Black, and Anthony and Jazz participated in that recording. And at some point or another, we talk about the very different experiences that they have with law enforcement than I've had with law enforcement. And it is, it's a real issue, and it's a real concern that you have to be aware of. Does that mean that every cop out there? No, absolutely not. In fact, the majority of them are good, but there are systemic issues that put them in a situation where bad things consistently keep happening. And, again, we have to take a look at that. So, but again, I cannot couch this enough before I go too deep down the grand political scheme. We've got a lot of dick jokes in our podcast. So, so I don't want it to say, beat me out there if this is not appropriate for your podcast. I'm sorry.
I love position of it.
Yeah. Would you take a step back and go, oh my God, this guy is like, we're not that big social drama, but that's the satire piece of it. And that isn't, my point is that's intentional. And because of that, because we are trying to put a slightly different voice into the community by having 50% of our cast be people of color. Andrew's Jewish, which is another additional flavor that you get to it. There is, his character's named Moyle Mossberg, for crying out loud. You can't get more. He just got revealed that his grand nemesis, he's like, I need an arch enemy. I'm like, don't worry, one's coming. So there's a group of assassins that are after him, named the Skeins, and there's 4 of them. So the 4 Skeins are out to kill Moyle Mossberg. So again, you kind of get the immature tone that we're going for, but at the same time, there's still some relevant elements you can put into it.
The skins, there's the what? No, yeah, the skins. There's 4 of them. There's okay.
Yeah, they so again, but I mean, so that's a challenge, is figuring out the right way to approach that, and getting feedback from the guys, and getting, the right tone in there while being conscious of that, without going too dark, you know what I mean? Because I think, I think there's a point for relevant discussion of all of this in every channel, but we're doing this to entertain, and we're doing this to kind of boost people up a little bit. So I think it's, you can't have satire without poking some fun at the problems of reality.
Yeah, no, I think that's really relevant with regards to going on today. And I think if there isn't that sort of connection with that, I think, people, as much as I would say people like escapism, I think it's a case of you can do escapism, but with a slight tinge of reality in there. Yeah. And so I think, definitely having to entertaining people, it's great. But with the nature of D&D and stuff like this, okay, I can only think this is this is the first game of when will this end for the first game, because it's It must be a hell of a long arc.
So the way that the story is set up to be structured is we had our an introductory arc, which kind of moved into, which introduced the characters, set up the context of the conflict, and then introduced the elements which are the motivating factors for the remainder of the cast, or for the remainder of the podcast. The second arc continues to set that stage where the guys have to find out what, and again, I not to spoil too much of the first arc, but at the end of that first arc, something has happened to them that causes them to be mystically bound together. Like they can only get so far apart from each other.
Mm.
And you can imagine, just the next time you're in any kind of public transit, pick the 5 people closest to you and imagine you couldn't get a mile and a half away from them, and what you would want to do to fix that. So they start to try and figure out how to fix that. The second arc answers the question of what they need to do, and then sends them off kind of hunting 5 different MacGuffins to be able to, one, not die, because there's a kind of a ticking clock on whether or not they survive, and then 2, to try and get their lives back a little bit. So and then there's a little bit of room for the occasional side quest or one shot. If I really want to do a haunted house episode, I'm going to do a haunted house episode. If I really want to do like a zombie episode, I can throw that. I've got ways to kind of fit that in there. So the pacing of it ends up being the way that we've seen. So we're on Moyle. We've just now gotten to where we're recording Moyle's arc, because Moyle's arc is kind of the first one that we go off on their own for reasons that become evident if you listen to the cast. And so we're want to see 1, 2, 3. It'll end up being about 6 sessions. So probably, 10 episodes probably at the end of the day. And that's probably the overall pacing that we'll see for the remainder of those arcs. So then that's, times another 4. So that's 50 episodes for the individual guys, and then a kind of a conclusion arc to kind of wrap the grand conflict up. Because as they're going through their individual story arcs, there's a kind of meta story in the background that's happening as they kind of navigate through this world, and the other players that are the other kind of factors that are kind of playing against them, whether that's the Mercantiles Guild, or the Church of Tritherion, or a couple other factors that we haven't introduced yet, because these guys have wreaked a little bit of havoc along the way, and they aren't necessarily cleaning up all their messes. So there will be some recurring foes that pop up from time to time, as good any good comic structure will tell you. So
yeah, no, like, okay, I have to ask, like, maybe this is the little imp in me coming out, but like, okay, so the happy band of 4 come charging out, and then basically someone trips a trap, pow, you're dead.
Right.
Like, and like it's like episode 3.
Yeah, well, hey, in episode so there, D&D had, especially in 5th edition, it's older, so D&D is in its 5th incarnation. All right. The original version came out in I think 76, 77 was when the original version plays. I started being familiar with D&D all the way back in 1st edition. My older brother played it. I would steal his stuff and read it. Played a ton of 2nd edition, flirted with 3rd edition a little bit, never played 4th, and jumped back into 5th when I got invited to be on a podcast for it. So 5th edition is probably the most welcoming to new players coming in, and also the most flexible with what happens when your character reaches 0 hit points. So hit points are the metric that for health in the game. And if you think of a life bar in a video game, in most video games, when that life bar gets to 0, you're dead. But in D&D, with under 5th edition rules, if you get to 0 hit points, you're dying. And then you have 3 turns to make what are called death saving throws, where you roll your 20-sided dice. And if you get 1 to 10, that's a strike against you. If you get a 11 to 20, that's a strike in your favor. If you get a 1, that's 2 strikes. If you get a 20, you automatically pop up and you're okay. So you're kind of bleeding out a little bit. You're dying. And there's a game mechanic associated with that. Now, during that 3-turn phase, your companions can come over and try and either cast a spell on you to bring you back up to 1 hit point, or there's a couple of different ways that they can revive you, or at the very least stabilize you. And there are in traditional D&D, in 5th edition D&D, there's a spell called Revivify that right after you die, you can get brought back to life by a cleric. But it's a kind of a very, very narrow window. And if you get chopped to bits, doesn't really do any good because you got to have all the bits. If and then there are like resurrection and reincarnation spells, but they are much more limited. I will say going into this, I wanted to set the parameters of what the character stakes would be. So in our story, there is no resurrection, there is no reincarnation. The revivify spell is there.
Mm.
Moyle, who is a notoriously reluctant healer, so far in the story, is the only person who can cast that spell in the party. He has to have it prepared. If he doesn't have it prepared, then they're out of luck. So what happens if those guys die? There is a story mechanic that I've got in place to deal with that I won't
Mhm.
reveal until it happens. But the guys could die. They are in a combat scenario right now where if they play their cards wrong, they're going to end up like there are some legitimately instantly fatal situations. But part of that goes to the mechanics design as well. Like way back in 1st edition D&D and 2nd edition D&D to a lesser extent, it was a lot more instantly fatal. Like you open a trapped door and there's a poison needle, boom, you're dead. I mean, if you look at those 1st edition character sheets, there's a saving throw against death ray on there. You don't get any more serious than a death ray. You
Uh,
know, there's no margin for error on that one if you get hit. So they've gotten away from that mechanically as a game because they and even if you go back to like researching the history of the game, the original players like Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson and that whole crew
mm,
played with multiple characters because they knew how deadly the game was and they wanted to have multiple characters prepped. And Gygax even designed, I think Tomb of Horrors is the original dungeon he designed to kill his the people that he played with just because he was pissed at how good they were doing. And it is one of the most fatal dungeons. It's been reinvented as the Tomb of Annihilation, which again is one of the most notoriously difficult modules for people to run through or pre-written stories for people to run through. But you've got to in a story, you've got to have character stakes. You know what I mean? The guy's decisions have to have consequences, and they are real. As a writer, I would be dumb not to leave myself a little bit of wiggle room but there is a very real mechanic in place that if and it happens. Todd's gotten knocked out. I mean, the guys haven't gone down a bunch of times. Like Todd's been knocked out, Fate's been knocked out a couple of times. They've been in that, but I've gotten them real close. And that's part of on because the other aspect of this as producing the podcast isn't just you got to write this story, you got to tell it entertainingly. You
mm,
also have to take the framework of the game design elements that the game provides you and then craft these scenarios that are mechanically challenging as well as narratively interesting. So and a lot of that you can do with puzzle boxes. I'm a big fan of the puzzle box episode. There's an episode, like 2 episodes I think it'll end up being coming up, where the guys are in a structure and trying to figure out a mystery, and it's just puzzle room after puzzle room after puzzle room, and there's a narrative reason for that. But they're kind of engaged with them like that. One of those rooms almost kills them. But part of it when you build the combat scenarios is looking at, okay, this is how many enemies I've got, this is the damage potential for these enemies,
mm.
this is the party's life levels and how much damage they can do. How do I balance these out? And there is an in-game mechanic for that, but it doesn't work great. It's called challenge rating. It isn't necessarily um, the best when it comes to truly balancing a scenario. Like it is a very spread. And don't get me wrong, as a spreadsheet guy, I got in. I love it. I think it's as a concept, it's fantastic. But there is a number boffed somewhere there where if it's not as difficult as it says it is. So you kind of got to beef it up a little bit, and then you kind of shift and tweak on the fly as you're getting into it. But so that's the other element to doing one of these is, how do I create a a fight that isn't just the guy's going, okay, I swing my sword at the goblin, I shoot another arrow
Mm.
at the goblin, because that's again boring for them, but also boring to listen to. You know what I mean? So there's got to be some extra elements. Like their first big battle that they fight has waves of enemies coming at them, some environmental challenges, a couple of different variety of enemies. They're in a little bit of an urban environment, kind of in the enclosed space. They're big battle that they've got coming up at the end of Moyles. So at the end of each of one of their characters, like there's going to be kind of a big epic boss battle kind of at the end of that, as well as different encounters during the way. And that those will be very much you bring in a positional element so that you force them to think about where they have to stand and where they have to move around. You bring in some different monster abilities so that they have to do more than think about attack. They have to think counter as well. So there's a game design element to it as well. And luckily there's a wealth of resources out there. Wizards of the Coast, if you're smart and you're playing these games and you're like, oh my God, I'm not a game designer. How would I ever do that? You don't have to do it yourself. Go out and pick up, even if you, they're in the swamp right now. I went out and picked up Secrets of the Salt Marsh, which is the Wizard of the Coast book. It's got 5 adventures in it. And I'm cherry picking the pieces out of that I want to apply for my scenario. Or buy a couple of the pre-written adventure books and run them and get a feel for it and kind of learn the vibe. And then you get a lot more comfortable with it. But there's a huge community that will be more than happy to answer questions and give you feedback, and you can really dive into it in a lot of different ways.
Now, that's a lot of information to take in. And look, I feel like I've learned a lot from this.
I told you I'm a rambler, man. You got to watch me.
No. But like, this is the thing, like with regards to the sort of story and structure and like the adventures you're putting your merry band through. In my mind, they're a merry band, and like they just go along. They've got a minstrel in the background. Bravely goes Sir Robin. Yeah.
Fate does bravely run away quite frequently.
There you go. But like, this is the thing, you're like the sort of structure you're putting in, and then they play through the scenarios. Like, I don't, like you said earlier in this, you're not an artist or anything like this, but I think you should team up with like someone who does comic books or something like this and do a sort of graphic novel of like each adventure as it goes along. So I know it might be a lot more work for yourself, but
no, hey man, I would love the opportunity to do that. In fact, one of the bigger D&D podcasts, Adventure Zone, actually has done that. They are they're kind of the big titans in the field are Adventure Zone, Not Another D&D Podcast, and Dungeons and Daddies, which is not a BDSM podcast, no matter what it sounds like. And they're kind of that's their tagline: Dungeons and Daddies. We're not a BDSM podcast, and they're hilarious, and they all have entertainment backgrounds. Like Dungeons and Daddies are the guys who did Video Game High School and have a screenwriting podcast. The NADPod crew is all from College Humor, which was a online video site, and then Adventure Zone, they all have kind of additional podcasting backgrounds as well. But that opportunity to mix the media is out there. Yeah, if I was putting together another podcast and I could put together your podcast dream team, if you want a piece of advice for anybody looking to start a D&D podcast, you put your cast together with a music person, an art person, and then a funny person, and those are your core 3 right there. Because if you can get those 3, that makes your life a million times easier. Because I'm outsourcing a lot of that right now. Like I use story blocks for all the sound effects, and had some theme music during the episode. I've kind of trailed away from having battle theme music just because of the way of editing, stretching it looped in a weird way I didn't like. So I just have leaned in on story effects. I use Tate Mahone is an Austin artist who did our character art. I had the kind of concept of doing kind of this, like if you've seen our promotional character art, the big piece that I use over and over again is the character, the pictures of the characters kind of overlaid, which, that's a comic thing. That's Bruce Banner. And I'm not a marketing genius. I saw a picture of Bruce Banner and the Hulk, like half and half. And I'm like, I'll do that with my characters. That's genius. And I've gotten a ton of positive feedback by that. And that was just guys send me a picture, found an artist on Fiverr. He did some great work. But yeah, if there are any comic book artists out there that want to collaborate and tell the story of the Party of 5, hit me up. We will make it happen. Because there's, there is, and I think there is an opportunity for us to do a visual element with streaming at some point, but I don't, that's a kind of a second stage goal for us, kind of when we get through it and kind of for special occasions.
Yeah, no, I would imagine with streaming, like this is the thing. One of the things which when you do podcasts remotely, you can, like, it's so extremely varied because when I started with a USB mic, like a webcam, and like basically, let's just say no mixer or anything like that.
Right.
And like the sort of standard of the sort of quality of the sound which came through was way over there. And like when I had interviewed first, like some people in the beginning, they didn't even have mics or anything like this. It was a case of they would have the headphones with no mic and they'll be doing it that way. And like the sort of standard is so varied. I think if you're going to do a live stream, you've got to actually be there in the room together.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because the and look, that's how we started. I mean, I think, most of our guys, when we started, I had a mic, Jamie had a mic, and then everybody else was using headsets, and everybody else has kind of transitioned over to standard mics now. And we started in Discord and moved to Zencaster. But it's funny. For me, the big challenge with D&D streaming isn't the being in the same room, because it's actually a little bit easier than the podcasting piece of it, because you just put a webcam up, you do your battle maps, and you're getting character reaction shots, and there's no editing. When you're done, you're done. But the downside to it is there's no editing. So all those middle bits that I cut out, because man, you do not want to hear me have to look on page 45 of the player's handbook to really remember exactly what the entangle spell does and its area of effect, because I don't have all the rules memorized. Maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, I will. It's been, if there was a time in second edition and third edition where I did, but there's been a long enough gap that I would go back and I'm relearning all this stuff. And, if you're a hardcore numbers D&D rules guy, you can point out on the podcast and in the PvP tournament where we screwed stuff up. Let us know. We're happy to listen, and then tell you, we're not going to change anything. But with streaming, that's all there. You know what I mean? So if that's why I think there's some entertaining stuff you can do with it. You just have to be conscious of it, and understand that pacing is so key. I've got 2 big streams coming up. One with a group called the Games Tavern to support a charity for feeding hungry kids, and then another one coming up with Gail Simone, the comic book writer, and the guy who headed D&D Beyond, and then a couple other people. To support Jasper's Game Day, which is a nonprofit which helps provide suicide prevention and suicide awareness for teens through gaming outreach. So that's the other thing. D&D is involved in a number of charities, like a number of podcasts do. So, but those streams, again, they've got those are kind of professional groups that are doing it. They know what they're doing. They understand that the streaming D&D is even more different than podcast D&D, which is even more different than your table D&D. It's I know, again, you're putting on a live show, and you've got to make sure that your audience appreciates it. And there may be an audience that wants to see that rules as written hardcore, and if you're out there, I respect you, I appreciate your but man, that's not for me. I can't conceive of it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to hear a 20-minute discussion about a cone and the area of effect of a spell. I know it's important to a lot of people. I respect that view, but I just immediately, my brain shuts down. I'm like, man, just freeze the God, just freeze them. Your shit. You've taken somebody focusing this ball of magical ice and spraying it outward in this cone of just frost and jagged shards, and turned it into geometry and math. And again, I know geometry and math are important. I love science, but my brain, so that's an aspect of it that you have to be, that to me is the challenge on the streaming side, because you have to be 100% on your game to keep it a compelling product. And I'm excited to kind of get a little bit more into that with some groups that have a little bit more experience with it,
Yeah.
but that's because I think I've still got a lot to learn in that field. But pacing is if the guys take a couple of minutes to remember something or have to go back through their notes, man, I edited. That's why a 3-hour session turns into like an hour and 45 minutes worth of content. because all that cutting room floor, I'm not just cutting out the off color stuff that Andrew says is moil, because there's some stuff I cut out. Um, but it's to, those kind of gaps is we reorganize. And I'm working off of 2 monitors, and last night I was like, God, I'm going to need a third monitor at this point, because I've got to get that. I've got so many screens and tabs open, because the more aggressively, as they get deeper into this, and as I have to come up with more compelling combat interactions, the
Mm,
amount of prep that I have to do becomes a little, and so right now, I can say they are in a fight where they're on a vehicle of some kind, and they are engaged with another group of enemies on another vehicle at high pace. So I've got to, number one, I've got to research all the character names and writers and producers for the movie Biker Boys, because it's a Biker Boys reference, because Jazz and Anthony like Biker Boys, and I wanted to throw something from their pop culture that they would get a laugh at. So Biker Boys, the really bad Lawrence Fishburne B movie from the 90s about
no,
motorcycle bike
I,
culture,
I,
does show up in our podcast.
no, no, no. I remember the Biker Boys. Jeez, like, oh my
Yeah.
God.
So
It's like that.
we're not afraid to do derivative deep pop culture cuts. So I got to do that. Then I've got to look up the individual statistics for these vehicles, come up with the creatures that are riding them, how they're going to be structured, rate. So I've got to map all that out and then manage that while recording the cast as well. And so, yeah, that you get to a certain point, like, how many balls do I have in the air at this particular moment? But that's, that's part of the fun of it. And I've played D&D. I've been a DM. I really love playing. I'm going to be really happy to get to play characters on this stream. I'm actually in pre-production with a second podcast where I play a character, Jimothy Haysword. He is a country soldier boy who secretly has magical powers he's embarrassed of. Any DM will tell you, anybody who's dungeon mastered or game mastered for a long amount of time, yeah, you like getting to play, and it's always nice to
Yeah,
have the opportunity of not to be the one to have to do all the work. But there's only about 4 or 5 or 6 sessions in before what you're playing starts making you itch to tell a story, like inspires you to tell that next story, and you start kind of itching to engage people with that. And that's the cool part about D&D from a collaborative story standpoint. You can see there's no question. I mean, your audience really, more than anything, now we hope our audience is bigger than the 5 guys that I'm recording with. I certainly hope they do it. But when you're for the average dungeon master, it's those 5 people either sitting on a screen in front of you or sitting at a table with you, and you can see how they're responding to it and what their tastes are, and you can tailor it and you can tweak it. And okay, well, this guy really loves riddles. This guy really loves combat. This gal really loves magic items. Okay, I'm not gonna. Again, you don't want to just be a slot machine, just
yeah,
where you're pouring loot out all the time. But you have the ability, the next time you sit down at that table, find those individual things and tailor that experience for them in a meaningful way. And it's great for them because they get to do what they like in a game setting. But two, it is incredibly rewarding to see that engagement and to see that people light up when they make those connections and when they do that. And D&D has the power to just create some incredibly epic moments where at the last minute your character is on the ropes and you roll the nat 20, which means you're critical hit and you're doing double damage, and you are literally pulling you and your friends out of the fire. That there's no way for the average person to get to experience those cinematic moments completely, and it's all their different varieties than D&D. Yeah, video games give you a little bit of that. Like, you can play competitive first person shooters, and there's that minute when you snag that second when you snag that last headshot to win the round or to put your team over the top. There's those moments. Otherwise, competitive gaming wouldn't be a thing. That's the compelling piece of competitive gaming. But those again are bound by the strictures that the gaming that the of the product that's handed to you, where D&D is unbound in that respect. And role playing games, I say D&D a lot. D&D is just the most prominent role playing game amongst a wealth and deep well of resources, from Pathfinder, which is kind of a similar to Dungeons and Dragons, to Call of Cthulhu, which is horror based. There is Expanse, The Expanse. The books and TV shows have a role playing game based off of them.
I love
So
that TV
it,
show.
it's a great show, man.
Oh
It is
God,
such a great
no,
show.
no, put it this way, with The Expanse, watched the first 3 episodes. It was when it was on Sci-Fi before it then changed to Netflix. Now on Amazon, I was in. I was like, just like, okay, I was in. Nothing was.
What got it for me is the when he takes the face mask off in vacuum, and because he has a guy who's got a cracked face mask and he has to take his face mask off even though he's in vacuum and repair and pop it back on, which is scientifically accurate. And I'm like, oh, this isn't okay. This is not Total Recall. Good. I didn't want that. I wanted something that was a little bit more respectful of the science piece of it without being hardcore. Let's spend 4 chapters talking about the faster than light speed engine kind of sci-fi. So it strikes that really nice middle ground between fantastical and technical, and they have some really compelling characters. My character on Friends and Flayers was inspired by Amos from that show. I was like, okay, here's a guy, I'm playing a functional sociopath that is extremely bound to his crew. Like that game was a guild-based game. So I was like, okay, he was an accountant. He was also a rogue. But he's going to be the kind of guy that once he gets into a structure, he's going to respect that structure and the boundaries that provide them. But everything else outside of that structure is completely fair game. And if you go against that structure, kidney stab. You know, I mean, that was his kind of go-to. So, that's, and again, that kind of speaks to, like, I think it's Austin Kleon that says, steal like an artist, like go out there and find those inspirations that, like, man, that's a really cool character. Well, dress him up in, leather armor, give him a couple of daggers and throw him in a tavern. And you can play that character in that environment. There are so many resources out there for people who want to go and find games to play or kind of get into the community. I mean, heck, you can even hire you can go on Fiverr right now and search for hire dungeon masters and find people who you can pay to run you through a game.
That's something I didn't expect to find on Fiverr.
You'd be amazed. Yeah, you'd be amazed. There are pro DMs out there. I am not one, but
not yet, maybe not yet. But like, I have to ask, like, this thing, look, like what you're doing, like what I love about yourself, like, is the passion you have for regarding D&D, but like basically building the story and like, basically trying to bring the best thing, like best adventures for people who want to listen to it and experience it. What is your sort of like, you've got a Patreon, like for your community to sort of take part in. What other things are you doing to sort of now grow a community to go, yes, like, yeah.
So we're doing, from, and again, I'm new to podcasting. This is probably about a year in with podcasting as a whole. So we've done kind of getting associated with some of the other larger groups out there. Games Tavern is a good example, kind of starting to build that relationship in the community there, participating in the tabletop community on Twitter, getting out there and doing some of these charity streams to let everybody know who we are. This is where we're at. Encouraging the cast members to go out and engage, like, guys, go out there and represent who you are and what we are in this space, because we are something different. And I don't want to do that because it feels exploitive if I do it. So, get out there and talk yourselves up. So those are kind of the big pieces. I mean, we're looking at doing some other promotional stuff. We may actually do some ads on a couple of the other bigger D&D podcasts to kind of get the word out. We're running a spot. Bombarded is a really cool, another Texas podcast, is a really cool podcast that we're going to be running a couple of ads with, just to kind of get into that, to let more people know that we're there. And the Patreon is, just a way to help improve the overall product that we're putting out there. I mean, 100% of that money that we collect goes back into the podcast. And we got 3 patrons right now. We are super small. We just launched our Patreon a month or 2 ago and have really just started loading in the bonus content into it. So, going on other podcasts and showing how into it we are. That's a big part of what we're doing. Just the podcast community as a whole. So those are kind of the big pieces that we're doing with it right now. And we'll continue to kind of reach out into other venues and continue to put it out there. When COVID is, once we're released from the depths of my little box that I've been living in for the last year, we'll probably do some conventions. There are a number of conventions. We'll have a presence at some of those to kind of, again, get the word out. Word of mouth is such a huge part of promoting an actual play podcast. And it's cool because there is, it's not niche. You can't, I mean, Dungeons and Daddies gets 150,000 listens a week. So it's hard to call them a niche podcast.
Damn.
Yeah. So there's a definite audience, but there is a very specific audience for this. And you can always get other, you can always bring new people into the community. We always capture new listeners. So we're lucky in the respect that we've got a lot of channels that we can operate in, that are like-minded individuals or like interested individuals. It's a very, very populated field. I mean, there's a bunch of different actual plays out there, and you can find a lot of different ones that bring a lot of different things to it. So we've got to continue to try and be unique in that respect. But the big thing is just kind of reaching out, like, and that was Monday. I had an interview with another podcast in Dallas, and they were like, yeah, we haven't done a whole lot of that stuff. And I'm like, well, and that's where I really kind of woke up to, oh, what a huge advantage we have in this space, because not only do we have a very well-defined audience, and again, there's always opportunity to grow. You don't want to just target that one group of people, but we have a very strong, very supportive vocal community that serves that audience as well. And part of it is, getting our street cred in that space, showing that, this is who we are, this is what we bring to the table, this is how it's valuable, this is how it's entertaining. We're going to be here next week, we're going to be here the week after that, we're going to sound better every single time that we come back, and when this story's over, we're going to crank one up and we're going to tell another one. So that's the beauty of it. We've got, we're going to continue to give, you know have fun with this, enjoy it as much as we can, but as well as put it out there for hopefully other people to enjoy, and hopefully inspire them to go out there and tell their own stories too. I mean, look, I got into D&D by sneaking into my brother's room and stealing his Dragon magazines out of the bottom left dresser of his drawer. If he'd had Playboys in there, my life probably would have gone very differently. But I was stealing. I couldn't even read the articles. I was reading the cartoons at the back. But that sparked that interest in me. And then I went and took his first edition out of a book called Deity and Demigods, and it took every pantheon could have imaginable. It included stats for King Arthur in there, and converted it to D&D. Well, what do you think was my first exposure to Greek mythology? Arthurian mythos. Cthulhu was in there. Elric was in there. All of that which is what sparked my love for that genre and literature, and got me reading, and really kind of got that whole process going. And it's really been fundamental for my interests, and help kind of shape my worldview and how I approach things, and problem solving, and learning to cope with some of the personal challenges that I have. All of that have been empowered through this activity, and nothing was cooler to me than, so I hadn't played for a good number of years. I kind of dropped out of the hobby, which had gotten to a point in my life where I just didn't have the social group to do it. There weren't the tools available that they currently were. And it just was focused on work and family, and video games. I was playing a ton of video games. And that literally the same week that Tony reached out to me from Friends and Flyers, said, hey, look, we're going into season 2. We'd love to have you come on. My son came up to me and said, hey, Dad, I've been hearing a lot about D&D. Can we try playing D&D? So it was like, okay, I get to kill two birds with this one stone now. And I said, okay, here's the deal, dude. You go tell your mom you want to do it. And if your mom makes your sister do it, then we'll do it. So sure enough, he went to her, and God love my wife, who is not a fantasy person and into any of the stuff that I'm into, was played ball. And then that made so now every Saturday, like clockwork, 8 o'clock in my house, my wife, my 9-year-old son, my 14-year-old daughter, and I sit down and play an hour of Dungeons and Dragons every week. And it is the really legitimately the only guaranteed family time that we've had, for the last 5 or 6 years. With COVID, it's been great to have a joint activity that's planned, and it's a good way for him and my daughter to practice math and storytelling, and so it's been a really incredible experience in that respect, to be able to do that particular piece of it and introduce him to it too, because I know I am opening him up to a lifelong journey, which is great, because he didn't like Star Wars, and I got real friggin' worried for a moment. My daughter jumped on it. It's awesome. I get to sit down with, like, every Friday, she and I sit down and watch whatever new show is out. whether, it was WandaVision, and now we're watching Falcon and the Winter Soldier. She's a huge MCU fan. God love her. When I showed her Star Wars when she was a kid, she just immediately bit right into it. It bounced off him, and I went, man, what am I going to do? What if he's, you know, but hey, you know what? It just took a little while, and now he plays a bronze dragonborn cleric, trickster cleric, and is great at it, and is, learning to tell stories with it and play a character. Like, for a 9-year-old, I mean, he came into it like, hey, I want to play this character. He's going to be amnesiac and he's going to speak broken English. And I went, dude, you're 9. This is your first time playing it. That's a bold move. And then do it and get to craft this story with him. Okay, well, this is why you lost your memory, and this is how you're going to get your memory back over the course of the adventure. And when you do, you get to change the way that your character interacts. And then, my teenage daughter, the worst thing in the world is that 30 minutes before she has to play D&D, because man, she don't want to do it. Oh, can we skip this week? But when she sits down at the table, she is the one that is the most engaged. She is a tactical genius. I am a little afraid of her from a combat perspective. I play test my encounters for the guys in the podcast with my kids. They do better than the party of 5 does. I don't know if they'll hear this, but don't tell them that, because like there is stuff that my kids will get in 2 seconds that I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have to help I'm gonna have to give them a clue. But so yeah, it's been really cool with that in that respect as well. So
yeah, I'm loving it. Like you've got one child, which I thought, like, when you went, he's not into Star Wars, thank God he's into this. That's gonna like go, okay, your stuff's on the side of the road off. Just like you've got another child who is like, yeah, probably a tactical genius, and I think if you got her to set up that the most dangerous like dungeon, as you mentioned, from like the first rendition of Dungeon.
Oh yeah,
I think she would like just like, yeah, okay guys, yeah, like this is it's Halloween and this is where everyone dies.
She is heartless, man. You gotta watch her. She plays a tiefling monk, and I know that people are like, oh, monks aren't as good as a character. Trust me, monks can be played very, very aggressively and very, very well, and she does a great job. And my wife plays a half elven bard named Esperanza Cumberbatch, so she has a lot of fun with that.
Loving it. Like, yeah, I have to ask, like, yeah, you mentioned like, yeah, WandaVision and like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, like as 2 of the shows you're watching. I just like doing this as a sort of different direction, like for the last part of the podcast, like just to sort of get your sort of vibe about the sort of Marvel TV shows which have come out.
Yeah.
Because like, yeah, I don't know, what did you think of like WandaVision?
So, full disclosure, I'm a big fan of the MCU. I grew up a Marvel kid. As I got older, I learned to love my appreciation of DC is mostly the B and C tier characters. Like I have a deep love for weird characters like Starman and the Red Bee and like all the weird kind of Silver Age DC stuff. There is just some great stuff there. And the DC TV stuff has been very melodrama-y, but decent. You know what I mean? Entertaining for sure.
No, the Batman, the animated series.
Oh, yeah. Oh God, yeah. During the night, yeah. That and even the Superman animated series was really good. And when they started crossing over, but to get back to your question, sorry. So it's been WandaVision, and then there was one before WandaVision, right? Or was it WandaVision the first one?
No, WandaVision was the first one, and basically Falcon Winter Soldier is the second.
So what I think Marvel has done to make their movies successful, and once they really, and you see this really, really crystallize when the Russos come in, and when you see it really kind of go forward, is they pick a genre and then they make a superhero movie within that genre. Right. So and once they figured out that formula, then the movies got more and more and more universally acclaimed more well. So, you know, I mean, Guardians of the Galaxy is a sci-fi comedy. Winter Soldier is a political thriller that, oh, by the way, has a super soldier in it. And it's got that kind of Cold War elements to it.
Mm.
So they kind of zero on that. And they're doing the same thing with their TV characters. WandaVision is a very, very different genre from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And you've got, you know, it does. The other thing too, I think that we have to appreciate is they're going to feel a little bit more transitional, I think, than the movies overall will. These are the these are forming the connective tissue to really kind of get us into the deep piece of phase. We on phase 4 or phase 5 now?
I think it's, oh God, I can honestly tell you there is just so much. I think it is like, yeah.
So go back. So WandaVision, I really appreciated WandaVision. I think as somebody who was familiar with that storyline from back in the actual comics days, where when Wanda and Vision were in the West Coast Avengers, the government comes in and kidnaps Vision. It's a little bit, they definitely told it differently. They take, it's nowhere, it's wacky in the show, but it's even wackier in the comics. But the only thing I didn't like about WandaVision is, and I'm gonna forget her name. The lady who played Agatha Harkness, the villain in that. I cannot remember the actress's name. She's fantastic. Oh, she is phenomenal. But in that,
I feel Sparky too. Come on,
yeah.
That was a killer.
I don't know if it was the costume or the direct. I've just seen her in so much other stuff where she nails it. And when she's playing the weird kind of sitcom-y character version of herself, she's nailing it. But when they get to the big reveal and she goes all mega witchy at the end, it just felt a little skosh off. But all the other beats, I mean, look, having the balls to pull in the other actor for Quicksilver as a giant troll, and it was just, I was like, guys, I just chef kiss. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate what you've done there. And look, Monica Rambeau, who gets her origin story in that series, has always been one of my favorite Avengers, going all the way back to when she, was Captain Marvel in the regular Avengers comics. So getting to see her get an origin story and really be there and be like, oh wow, she's gonna, like, it's such an awesome character, such an awesome power set, and get to see the potential with that. So I really liked WandaVision. I think it set some stuff up. I think it was well acted. Yeah, there are you pick at anything enough, you can find a point or two that you would like to see done better. Falcon and the Winter Soldier has been a completely different animal. I'm enjoying it thoroughly. I like the 80s buddy cop vibe that they've got going on. And that's what this is, a Tango and Cash Marvel series. Like if you think back to those, Beverly Hills Cop, 80s, 90s kind of buddy, slightly antagonistic action movie dramas, that's the dynamic they set up, while also building some really cool, interesting. They bring in the power broker from the comics. They bring in John Walker, that is one of the biggest jerks in the history of comics, and try to make him a little bit likable, but do such a great job of just giving this guy, it's like, when you watch, you're like, oh, this guy, they have done that out of everything that they've crafted in that, making him inherently unlikable, despite not really being that big of a jerk until last week's episode.
Oh, you haven't seen this week's episode yet?
No, I haven't seen this week's episode yet. I know things go badly. So they have been they've been doing some excellent work. Do I wish this one feels a little bit short? And I guess that's the thing that and I don't know if this is a production cost issue. I don't know if this is a COVID issue. If they looked at what happened with the Netflix Marvel shows, which are generally pretty good. If they went, okay, 13 is obviously too long, let's go a little bit shorter. Another, like, WandaVision, I think, was perfect at its length. Falcon and Winter Soldier, I'd like another episode or two, because it feels like they're racing headlong to that. And I wanted to see I want to get a couple episodes with Sam as Captain America. You know what I mean? And it doesn't feel like I'm going to get that.
Yeah, I like, with regards to like WandaVision, yeah, they had the right amount of episodes. I agree with you there. With regards to sort of character development, I think with the first round of these shows, doing character development is perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
What I would like to see when it comes to WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I can't really put this on Falcon and the Winter Soldier just yet.
Yeah.
Until next week's episode, when that's the last one. I think WandaVision's one and done, and
Yeah.
not going to do it anymore. But I think they can come back to Falcon and the Winter Soldier again and again and again. Like, I think it's a case of, with these TV shows, if they can sort of like go, okay, it's actually a mainstream point to the film, or there's like stuff which really sort of, there is consequences.
Yeah.
For the longest time, there was never a consequence in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah.
There was like, all of a sudden, it's like, okay, everyone's bitched and complained about there's no consequences, blah, blah, blah. Okay, watch. Here we go. Event like Infinity War. It's like, oh, you like those consequences? It's like, oh, Endgame. Well, yeah, we get like, there's one or two consequences. Then you guys go, okay. I like the fact in the TV shows that you like go, okay, there is a lot of freaking consequences coming down, and it's coming down hard on pretty much everyone. And I like the way the Falcon and the Winter Soldier has taken it more down a political line, rather than sort of just like everyone flipped back and it was like in WandaVision and there was chaos going on, but no one knew what the hell was going on. And it was like, okay, yeah, I'm digging it.
The end of WandaVision is incredibly powerful. Yeah, it does suffer from the third act CGI heavy big boss fight that all of these movies and shows end up being. But you know what? Look, I'm a comics guy. I love that. You know, I mean, like that. I'm okay with that. Give me women flying in the sky, firing laser bolts at each other while they draw giant symbols to cast a magic spell. I am not going to tell you that's a bad thing, but and I think but the ending of that, man, when without spoiling too much of it, where she's looking out the window in the kid's bedroom and seeing what's coming, and just like, dude, that was, again, bold choice not to give it the tied up in a bow happy ending that they could have done with. I also really like they're setting up Young Avengers. They are very, very clearly setting up Young Avengers, which is a really cool series, and we'll get to do some really cool stuff with. Falcon Winter Soldier. To me, the world building is cool. It's great to see the dynamic between Sam and Bucky. The value of that story, the weight to that story, is what would it mean to be Black and the symbol of America. All right. And I'm saying this as a white guy coming from a place of privilege. That's not my story to tell, but that was the story that they tried to do in the comics. That's what I think would be a really goddamn important story to tell in America right now. And I just don't know that they're going to fit it in this arc. And that, if anything, at the end of it, I'm going to go, man, I feel like we're missing out on getting to have this conversation through the art of these characters.
True. I would say, with regards to the episodes, like, if like, I know they're getting slightly longer with Falcon Soldier, and like, I'm not going to give anything away because I've seen episode 5, and like, I think this is the longest one yet. But I understand where you're coming from with that, and not less if they're going to make like the last one like a proper like feature length film. It's going to be kind of, how do you get that in? Like, or is like the reason why they were holding off Black Widow up until this point, where it's like all of a sudden now you've got the whole connective tissue into that. I don't know, but I would say, that sort of question, I think, is like, it has been asked in American history, can you have a Black president? Which has happened, but Captain America, especially with the way it is sort of more like so propagandary, with that, it's like, wow. And you kind of like sort of, I like the way they set it up, where Steve, as they keep saying, like he bore that shield a long time before he actually got that shield, because of his character and everything like this. So it's like, can you live up to that sort of ideal? Can you be that ideal? Because you look at the films, you like go, freak, that's a very, very high mantle.
Yeah, it is. And that's what I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the dynamic that they've done. I will watch a story about a dude with a cyborg arm who's out of time, who can make, I read Tolkien when it was first published, Rip Van Winkle jokes all day long. But I think we ultimately do a disservice to the opportunity that this could tell, you
Mm.
know what I mean? Kind of behind that. And again, I mean, there absolutely not only could be a season two, there should be a season two. I'm super stoked to see what comes next with that. I'm really excited about Moon Knight. Again, talking about the love of B and C tier characters. Moon Knight is one of those weird Marvel characters that I am absolutely in love with. Oscar Isaac is playing him, which is even better. I cannot wait for that to come out. That's kind of my next big obsession.
Well, just all I got to simply say to you is this: make sure you've got your Disney Plus subscription paid up and like going strong, because oh yes, like whether it's phase 4 or phase 5, I think it's phase 4, which is coming on next. Like I think that's going to be sort of like very important. And with regards to the multiverse of madness, which like Doctor Strange, like I think that's going to be the one where, yeah, good old Wanda, I think is gonna, like, I'm not too sure what they're like. She can't be saying the line "no more mutants" because classic line from the comics.
Yeah,
She'd be like
exactly.
saying, "Let there
It'll
be mutants." What will she do?
Yeah, where they bring in, because I think they're already, I do believe they're working on another Fantastic Four film within the MCU proper, and it's only a matter of time before they bring mutants and the X-Men into that. They've been too big of a property for that for too long. Now that they've the Fox acquisition has happened, how they do that, how they work that in, yeah, I think everybody is kind of looking at that Multiverse of Madness movie and going, okay, this is where y'all do it, right? This is where you guys flip the switch and everything gets squished back in, and we see, there is a lot of possibility. And if I'm going straight up comic book tinfoil hat guy for you, so if we're looking at meta narrative through the comics for the last couple of years, they did do the Secret War, where they
Secret
mashed all
Invasion.
the Secret, not Secret Invasion, because they're actually doing a Secret Invasion show. So they're
Ah,
going to bring Secret Invasion in, where Sam Jackson's coming back, and how they're going to pull that off with Skrulls not being a bad guy, I'll be real intrigued to see. But I forget what the name of the big crossover event was, but where they mashed all the universes together to do kind of a Crisis on Infinite Earth soft reboot. So
it
it
was.
feels like Phase 4 may be the setup for that, because then that gives them the opportunity at the end of phase 4 to bring those other pieces in for phase 5.
Mm,
And then so that's what I would kind of keep. That's what I'm scanning for as we kind of go through what they've got, because you've got Eternals coming up. You've got Black Widow. You've got the Benedict Cumberbatch and
Doctor
Wanda's
Strange, multiverse
Doctor
of
Strange. Yeah.
madness.
So we'll be and credit, like, I liked Doctor Strange. I think it's in the top tier, but not at the top of the top tier of the movies that they've done, simply for the visual imagery of pulling off Dormammu, which was not something that was easy to do. And the way that they ended that, like, that is, I'm a big Cumberbatch fan. I loved Sherlock. The guy, besides having one of the most British sounding names in the history of cinema, he's a great actor. He's a great for that character. I don't know if he works as the Tony Stark for because they kind of set him up to be kind of the smarmy smart guy who brings everything together. Maybe that's the role that they're going to kind of put him in phase the next arc, as we go a little bit cosmic and weirder, but that remains to be seen.
Yes, I've got to. Yeah, I would say they're going to have him sort of Stark-esque.
Yeah.
I think it's a case of to say we've seen the last of Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr. in this cinematic universe. All I would simply say is, yeah, that's a lie. And like with regards to the sort of multiverse of madness, I think they might do like. I think cameos will be a plenty in that.
Oh yeah.
I can actually see them doing a like Hugh Jackman, like
Oh yeah.
like Ryan Reynolds, like sort of like little crossover with that. So yeah,
I,
there's a number of things.
Yeah, that was one of the cool things. Again, the CW, DC shows, our production quality are way lower. Just kind of overall, I mean, they're enjoyable. They're a little bit more. They're definitely a little bit more of a B movie compared to kind of the big pieces that Marvel does. But I will say that the one thing they did because they managed to pull Crisis on Infinite Earths off on a TV budget. And one of the things that they did is they did just cameo after cameo. They had the original Robin come back and do a
Yes, I
cameo.
remember that.
They had, I think, the guy who played Superman in Smallville had a cameo. Like every possible actor who's ever played a DC role made some kind of cameo or had some kind of role in that. It was just a really cool, as somebody who never thought that would be on the movie screen, let alone on the TV screen. It was just really cool to see. Now, the way they did the Spectre was really not great, but it was still, you got to occasionally take a step back and just take in the wow of, man, this is really cool. We are in there's so much content out now of
Mm,
so many different varieties that, yeah, across all levels of quality and spectrum and interest. It's really cool to get to kind of pick and choose and kind of have so many opportunities to dive in and do that and live in a world where the technology allows us to serve it up however we want. You know what I mean?
I hear that. I hear that. Now, I like, you know what? On the sort of pantheon gods type thing with DC, I have to reveal to you this. Yes, I am a being of supreme cosmic power, and I can grant you one wish. And before you say anything, you can't have world peace. You can't have, I wish COVID went away. No, because look, I had to draw on the powers of Dolly Parton, and there's only one power, which is higher than that. That's Beyonce. And like, look, I can't be doing that. That's too much cosmic paperwork right there. I, no writing down a list of things like I wish everything on this list comes
Mm-hmm.
true. And look, and yes, because there's been a number of impish people which have been coming onto this podcast recently. No wishing for more wishes, no wishing for infinite wishes, none of that. Now, what would your wish be?
Uh, you know what? I really do. If I was going to be selfish, I would say I wish more people would listen to my podcast. But that's not what I'm going to do. I'm not going to be that selfish guy. What I would say though, which could lead to more people listening to my podcast, is that I really do wish everybody would step out of if you're not participating in the gaming community in some way, form, or fashion for some preconceived notion, like, oh, that's nerd stuff, or oh, isn't that like, isn't that super complicated, or aren't people really mean when you go into comic book stores? I wish everybody would take a step back from those preconceived notions or reservations. Go pick up a copy of one of the starter box sets for Dungeons and Dragons. It comes in a standard flavor, it comes in a Stranger Things flavor. Everything in that box is there for a group of people to sit down and play a game. Sit down and tell a story together in this particular format. Not It won't be everybody's cup of tea. It won't spark everybody to go to tell a podcast, but I guarantee you everybody will have some fun with it, and it will be a unique experience that a lot of you will take forward into your lives in a lot of positive and constructive ways. So that's I wish everybody would just go out there and if there's that reservation that's holding you back from trying something new in this realm, give it a shot. I guarantee at the very least you'll have a cool story to tell either at the table or away from it.
Ah, superb, superb. Love that. Ah, Turner, can you tell the lovely people out there how they can reach you, how they can get in contact with you, how they can get your podcast?
Absolutely. If you want to listen to the cast, you can check us out at gmdlcast.com/listen. That will be a link that takes you to all the major podcast platforms. It'll serve you right up. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and we're everywhere. So just GMDL for Gimme Da Loot. gmdlcast.com/listen. You can find me. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, but look, Twitter is where I spend most of my time. You can find me at GMDLcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, but mostly Twitter. And those are the two big spaces we're at right now. We've got some streaming. Like I said, I'm coming up and doing a streaming show of kind of a live D&D podcast with the Games Tavern. I will be throwing up links to that on social media. I'll be doing another Twitch, and these will be on Twitch. I'll be doing a couple of Twitch streams with the Games Tavern and then with another streaming channel to support Jasper's Game Day. Just check us out on social media. We'll have all the information posted up there. Those are the big places right now. I will be appearing in a couple other podcasts as they come out of pre-production as characters. This is, man, I only have the strength and magic to run and write one of these things at a time. But and then you can always check us out if you do want more. You can always check us out at patreon.com/GMDL cast. And that's where you'll see the different level tiers you can support, what you get for it. At the very basic level, you're going to get some additional world building and backstory. There's a visual PvP tournament where the guys fight each other for bragging rights and a trophy. And if we get enough patrons, I'm buying a championship belt. There is a supernatural podcast we do some home building. And then at the upper levels, I will be collecting all the adventures that I write and crafting them into player supplements. So if you wanted to run an encounter at waypoint 13 with the kobolds, we would give you the tools to do that. And then at the top level, you would actually get to sit down and play a game with the party of 5. Our top supporters get to sit down with the party of 5 once a quarter and play a game with them. So there's a lot of other bits and bobs in there. Like you get to name NPCs, you get to create magical items, you actually get to contribute to the story world, and get a special shout out, because again, it's a collaborative storytelling. But those are the best ways to reach us and to find us.
Superb. Turner, I'd like to say thank you for coming on today. You have been an absolute star. I would definitely.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Well, hey, I super appreciate the opportunity. It's been just a real joy speaking to you. Your energy is fantastic, man. Thank you so much for your time, and you have yourself a great weekend.
Indeed I will. What I got to say to you, one, thank you, Turner. Two, yes, my friends, my life warriors, I would like to say, yes, stay safe, stay well, be awesome, be excellent, be fantastic, be all the positive bees you can be in this world, and then some. Have a great day, guys. Peace. And we